In the last lecture, we had an introduction to what is vulnerability assessment. In this lecture, we are going to see different phases of vulnerability assessment. Vulnerability assessment and scans should be performed on a regular basis. IT environments are changing all the time. For instance, a software update or a system configuration can change or could change into a complete new vulnerability. New threats continue to emerge. So, it's essential to identify and address vulnerabilities quickly to limit cybersecurity risk. Vulnerability scanning is only part of a vulnerability assessment. Other processes, such as pen testing, can identify different types of threats to IT in your organization. Pen testing complements vulnerability scanning and is useful for determining if a vulnerability can be acted on and whether that action would cause damage and data loss or other issues. So, the first phase is initial assessment phase. It identifies the assets and defines the risk and critical value for each device based on the client inputs such as security assessment, vulnerability scanner. It's important to identify at least the importance of the device that you have on your network or at least the devices that you will test. It's also important to understand if the device can be accessed by any member of your company, such as a public computer, or just administrators and authorized users. The initial assessment phase is also important to gather information about the systems before the vulnerability assessment. At least review if the device has open ports, processes, and services that shouldn't be open. Also, understand the approved drivers and software that should be installed on the device and the basic configuration of each new device. Try to perform a banner grabbing or learn what kind of public information should be accessible based on the configuration baseline. Like, does the device send logs into a security information and event management SIM platform? Are the logs at least stored in a central repository? Gather public information and vulnerabilities regarding the device platform, version, vendor, and other relevant details. Next is to perform a vulnerability scan. Use the right policy on your scanner to accomplish the desired results. Prior to starting the vulnerability scan, look for any compliance requirements based on your company's posture and businesses, and then know the best time and date to perform the scan. It's important to recognize the client industry context and determine if the scan can be performed all at once or if a segmentation is needed. An important step is to redefine and get the approval of the policy for the vulnerability scan to be performed. For the best results, use related tools and plugins on vulnerability assessment platforms. In case you need to perform a manual scan for critical assets to ensure the best results, be sure to configure the credentials on the scanner configuration to perform a better and deeper vulnerability assessment. The last is the post-assessment phase. It includes risk assessment, remediation, verification, and monitoring, and the most important, report creation. Pay attention to the details and try to add extra value on the recommendations phase. To get the real value from the final report, add recommendations based on the initial assessment goals. Also, add risk mitigation techniques based on the criticalness of the assets and results. Add findings related to any possible gap between the results and the system baseline definition. Also, add the ways that how the vulnerability can be mitigated. Findings on the vulnerability assessment are normally very useful and are ordered in a way to ensure the understanding of the various reports and findings that you have achieved through the vulnerability assessment phase. The last phase, that is the post-assessment phase, will reflect a complete understanding of the security posture in all the different aspects of the process. It will also deliver a better outcome for something that in the most cases is just a compliance tool. There are 6 types of vulnerability assessment tools. The first is the host-based vulnerability assessment tool. A host-based vulnerability assessment tool finds and identifies the OS running on a particular host computer and tests it for known deficiencies. It searches for common applications and services. The next is the depth assessment tools. These tools find and identify previously unknown vulnerabilities in the system. These type of tools include fuzzers. Next is the application layer vulnerability assessment tools. Application layer vulnerability assessment tools are directed towards web servers or databases. The scope assessment tools. They provide security to the IT system by testing for different vulnerabilities in the applications and the operating systems. Active and passive tools. Active scanners perform vulnerability checks on the network that consume resources on the network. Passive scanners do not affect system resources considerably. They only observe system data and perform data processing on a separate analysis machine. Location and data examine tools. These are network-based scanners, agent-based scanners, proxy scanners, and cluster scanners. So, characteristics of a good vulnerability assessment tools are: it ensures correct outcomes by testing the network resources, ports, protocols, and operating systems. Uses well-organized inference-based approach for testing. Automatically scans against continuously updated databases. Creates brief, actionable, and customizable reports including vulnerabilities by severity level and trend analysis. Supports various networks. So, how to use a vulnerability assessment tools? Vulnerability assessment tools are used to test a host application for vulnerabilities. Choose the tools that best satisfy the following requirements, like test from dozens to 3000 different vulnerabilities depending on the product. Contain several hundred different attack signatures. Match your environment and expertise. Have accurate network application mapping and pen testing. Have a number of regularly updated vulnerability scripts for the platform you are scanning. It should be able to generate reports, and also it should be able to check different levels of pen testing to prevent lockups. In the next lecture, we will see vulnerability scoring systems.